week, right? I am the moderator for this uh, day, along with Patrick Andre Menchas. Hello, Andre. Andre, are you here? So, while we wait for um, Andre to reconnect, yes, okay. So, just to start a little reminder. For today, we will be starting our conference with our plenary speaker, uh, Associate Professor Ryan Christopher Mabolic. And following that, we have Localizing Prudence in the Capital Punishment of Aquinas and the Death Penalty in the Philippines by Floren Vera. And later, our final speaker for tonight, is Joshua Cedric Gundayao with his paper entitled Christianity, Politics, and the Problem of the Will. So, Andy, are you here?
Hi, hello. Hope I'm being narinig po ako. Yes.
Okay, good evening.
Okay, good evening everyone. So, so I guess we can already start our graduate conference, or the third day of our graduate conference, and I welcome you all once again for joining us for tonight. Uh, and perhaps in line with our theme, we can perhaps say a short prayer for tonight. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, may the road rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So again, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third day of the first uh, Tomasian Graduate Conference in Graduate School Conference, and I'll be moderator for today. I'm Andre, and having us Jillian. Jillian, okay, hi daw din sabi ni Jillian. Anyway,
Hello, hi.
okay. So before we formally start our uh, conference, may we just simply remind everyone of a few reminders. Number one, this graduate conference is free and open to the public. We do not require any registration prior to attending. Please make sure to keep your microphones muted to avoid any unnecessary distractions. We would discourage you from keeping your videos on as to not consume too much bandwidth allocation. Each day has designated moderators who will monitor the time allotted for each speaker and to sort out the questions and comments during the discussion portion. For keynote lectures, we have a maximum of 1 hour, 40 to 45 minutes for the presentation, with the remaining 15 to 20 minutes for discussions. For graduate paper presentations, a maximum of 30 minutes allotted, with 10 to 15 minutes for the presentation, while the remaining 15 to 20 minutes for the discussion. Questions and comments will be entertained by the chat box. The moderator will be the one who will assist the speakers by reading the questions and comments. Please note that not all will be entertained due to time constraints. Should there be more focused queries for the presenter, the book of abstracts contain the email addresses of the speaker and the organizing committee members. You may contact them directly. Please be reminded that the entire conference is recorded. We expect that you observe the utmost respect and professionalism in treating the speakers, moderators, and all of the participants. Please refrain from flooding the chat box with unnecessary and offensive remarks. We reserve the right to kick you out of the sessions if your behavior is deemed inappropriate. And we will give certificates after the entire conference. Towards the end of each day, we will make available the evaluation form for that particular session. You You must attend at least three sessions or 3 days to receive a certificate. Please be reminded to use the same email address to which we will send the certificate in answering the evaluation form, and to use the same name which you wish to appear on the certificate. Lastly, please like and follow our Facebook pages to get updated with the conference and for future events, the lecture, a graduate journal, philosophy, and the Society of Tomasian Graduate Students of Philosophy. Thank you very much. Uh, okay, I think Len can already introduce our next speaker, our plenary speaker for tonight.
Okay. So, hi. If I'm not mistaken, may problema dun sa video ko. Apologies. So, okay. For our first speaker for tonight, let me just give you a short introduction of him. So, he is an associate professor at Ateneo de Davao University and a visiting professor for global justice at the American University of Sovereign Nations. He holds a Master's of Arts in Applied Ethics from Linköping University of Sweden and the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, Norway. He finished his Master's in Philosophy at Ateneo de Manila University. He received his doctorate in philosophy, maxima cum laude, from the University of San Carlos. He was trained in democracy and governance at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Bonn and Berlin, Germany, and was a delegate in the Erasmus Mundus GA in Brussels, Belgium. He served as editor of the Social Ethics Society, Journal of Applied Philosophy, and is a peer reviewer for a dozen Scopus indexed international journals. So, in presenting his paper entitled The Radicalization of Politics in the Philippines, may we please welcome Associate Professor Christopher Ryan Mabolic, PhD.
Good evening, Jillian. Can you hear me?
Yes po, medyo
Okay.
madilim po ata.
Hindi makita yung... Anyways, this research that I will be presenting tonight, I just recall there was a time in 2015 where Brother Romy Abulad, myself, and the harshest critic of the president in Cebu, my good friend Roderick Abellanosa of the Ateneo, were discussing the candidacy of Rodrigo Duterte at that time. And I told Brother Romy, who is of course a good philosopher from UST, that Duterte will win the elections for very urgent reasons at that time. And these reasons, I suppose, were not actually created by the then candidate Rodrigo Duterte, who was mayor of Davao City, but rather the circumstances at times, I presume, simply was ripe for somebody from Mindanao who will be taking over Malacanang from the what we might consider as traditional centers of power. And of course, we refer to the elites in Philippine politics. And I thought I was able to convince the good brother that Duterte did have a good chance to win the elections. And it was not because of Duterte himself, but because of the weakness of the political apparatus of the, at that time, prevailing, as I've said, the liberal reformist, say, landscape that was in control for so long a time, ever since the Americans left. I also received a book, this book from the National University of Singapore, and it was a book written by the Japanese scholar Wataru Kusaka, who did his master's at UP and was actually living in Tondo for almost a year. And he was able to have a first-hand experience of how Filipinos actually do their politics. And I was asked by the NUS to review the book and to actually write an op-ed for the Philippine Daily Inquirer. And I did write something. The book is Moral Politics in the Philippines. Well, before finalizing this paper, I gave it to Brother Carl Gaspar, who reviewed the facts and gave me some crucial insights so that I will not be able to miss on very important things. Now, those are the best part of this research on radical democracy. The harsh part of this research was when I submitted this proposal to my school. Some higher ups did not want it. Actually, my immediate superior, I will not mention the name, did not sign. And so I had to confront him and ask him, why will you not sign this research proposal? And I told him, it's not your job to determine whether the proposal is acceptable or not. There is a research council, and it is up to the good people of that research council to determine if it is something that is worth doing. Well, I was able, not convinced, I was able to prevail over him, and he actually signed the proposal. The next part was, of course, the submission of the capsule. The capsule was like 3 pages, but I got something like more than 3 pages of comments. It's like, submitting a paper that is rejected, and you realize that there's not much to like on the paper, and the comments are overwhelming, that when you go over these comments, it's like you can write another paper based on those comments. And I felt disappointed at first, and yet I still pursued and rewrote the capsule. And I do not know if it is God or it is fate or whoever the hell has power here on earth, it got approved. And so Ateneo de Davao was, in this regard, quote unquote, forced to fund this research on Rodrigo Duterte. What is this research all about? Allow me to share some screen. Okay, see it now. Okay. Do you see the screen, Jillian?
Yes po, kita po.
Okay, maraming salamat. So preliminary insights. Okay, what is the concern that I have here? Well, if you go through the literature, so everybody's saying that Rodrigo Roa Duterte, and I mean scholarly literature, is saying is a bad president. Okay? That he's somebody who is like actually nuts. So he's someone who is against any type of reform. He's somebody who is unconventional. He's disruptive. He's a penal populist. He's an autocrat. He's a despot. He's a dictator. That's what they're saying. What is the basis for that? Okay. My inkling is the basis of these scholars in saying so is that they have a conception of what an ideal society is. Okay. And that ideal of a society is based upon reason and deliberation. And this conception of society is rooted in what we call deliberative liberalism. It is represented by Nicole Curato, Nathan Kimpo, Wataru Kosaka. All of them argue that President Rodrigo Duterte is a penal populist. Now, let me explain what penal populism is. Populism, as most of us know, is like pitting the powerless against the powerful. And then some leader would blame the powerful as reason as to why the powerless are in a difficult situation. And in this respect, the powerless uh, in that way will be convinced that this leader actually represents them. And so therefore, the leader draws his strength from quote unquote manipulating the mindset of these people. So that by populism, you become in that respect somebody who controls the consciousness of people based upon this idea that you're someone who is advocating for their good. Now, why penal populism? Because according to Nicole Curato, Duterte instills fear on the minds of the masses. And he does so by means of his war on drugs. How is the war on drugs a form of penal populism? Otaro Kosaka explains that it's like you divide society into the good and the bad, the virtues, and to use the term of Ms. Curato, the scums of the earth. Drug addicts, the drug pushers, the drug lords, they are the scums of the earth. And we must be afraid of them because we are virtuous citizens. And because we're virtuous citizens, for Duterte, it is his job to protect our security. And in that regard, those people that we consider as bad, those people that we consider as a threat to our security will have to be eliminated. And so the idea here is, according to Curato, Duterte is painting a picture of society wherein, on one hand, there are bad people, and on the other, there are good people. And according to Curato, Duterte wants to eliminate the bad people so that he's able to protect the good people. And in that respect, he's able to control both. He controls the bad people because they are afraid that the government and the state might run after them. On the other hand, the good people also have fears, insofar as they might think that without Duterte, their safety and security would be compromised. And so this is what penal populism is all about. It's not just about the poor people being hunted because they have these drugs violations. It's also about a rising middle class. It's also about the business elite who need someone whom they think can protect their interests. And Duterte, for them, theoretically serves that purpose. So, in a deliberative democracy, we base everything on reason. And so we have a vision of society whereupon society is supposed to be based on an ideal upon which we are respectful of each other's dignity as human beings. And in this respect, what a society is all about what we call the institution. The institution that we refer to, of course, is the basic structure. And that basic structure will have to be defined by rules, by laws, and policies that will protect and promote the interests of everyone. And so a president in that sense who is disruptive, a president who has progressive and radical ways, a president who does not follow rules, a president who wants to do things on his own, is somebody who is, according to his critics, violative of the basic principles of rational deliberation. Now, well, that sort of idea from these world-class scholars is, of course, quite clear. And I suppose it is, in a way, fairly reasonable. But I also think that if we simply assume and believe what they say, then what is the purpose of debate? Why, in the first place, if Duterte is really such a leader, how come he won the elections? How come a rising middle class, an educated professional, the tech and social media savvy youth of the land voted for him? And I was thinking and was looking for a theory that might situate the kind of politics that Duterte is doing. And here I believe that uh, Laclau and Moff and Chantal Moff, most especially, represents the kind of politics that is happening in the country. And so what is misunderstood sometimes is when we try to enunciate what is happening in the country, the misconception is that we favor a particular candidate, and in this case, the president of the Philippines. In point of fact, what I'm trying to do is to offer an alternative perspective, an alternative framework, a different way of looking at the situation in the country. Because if indeed the right way forward is singular, and that is the deliberative manner by which society will have to do its business. And how come there is still so much inequality? How come there is still moral rebellion in Mindanao? How come there still exists communist insurgency? And here, what radical democracy offers is that, according to Chantal Mouffe, it is as if liberalism reduces politics into morality, right and wrong. The senator insists that this is the right thing to do. Another senator says, no, that is wrong. This is the right thing to do. But we realize, however, the society, Philippine society in particular, is not like that. Because politics is about power relations. In a school, for instance, you have policies and you have rules, and these rules are promulgated by well-meaning people, well-dressed people, very fluent people. However, we know for a fact that these people actually do these things not because they care for the interests of every stakeholder that is part of the whole educational system. Even if a school is very beautiful and has high-rise edifices, that doesn't mean that the school actually serves social and economic justice for its own sake. Why? Because the more money they put into building physical structures, that will mean tuition will have to rise. And the more expensive tuition becomes, the more you exclude those individuals who cannot afford good education because they were born poor. And so therefore, it's a sham to say it's because of justice. It's because we have duty to the good of our children. And because we want the best for our country. And that is for this reason that we're building these towering edifices. We're designing good curriculum because it is the way for the country to overcome every difficult circumstance that its people have been going through. That's not the point, because the reality is it's all about power relations. Who is in charge? And so therefore, when it comes to politics, it's not different. There is in this respect the reality of disagreement, antagonism, and conflict. And so there is a wrong presumption when it comes to rules and procedures. We assume that rules and procedures are correct because they are rules so established by legitimate authorities. But we have to examine who in the first place put these people in their position of authority. You can look into society and who is in control of society. You can look into Philippine elections and who actually put people in the houses of Congress, the lower house and the upper house. You can look at your own institution your dean, your BP, ABP, and whatever position these people are holding. Who put them there? Is the process really that democratic? Are people actually consulted with regard to their inner sentiments as to whom they believe is most effective, most efficient, and most loving, quote unquote, so that this individual, once and the moment he's put into power, will actually take care of his or her subordinates. And so, when it comes to radical politics, then we have to be aware that rules are not always just, that regulations are not always meant to protect the interests of the powerless. Precisely, we need to ask who devised, designed, and put these rules into order. And so it's a question in that respect of your position in the social, economic, and political hierarchy. And so this leads us to this concept of agonistic politics. What is this agonistic politics? Well, we assume that there is always what we call a perfect consensus. But there can never be a perfect consensus. Imagine husband and wife, two people, and in the first place, they have been in love. And yet they cannot even agree as to which K-drama they will watch tonight. And so if you consider society and the different attitudes of people, the different positions of people, the different upbringings of people, the different cultures of people, the different sets of belief of people, what you have in that respect is nothing but difference. But here, we will focus on what we call structural differences. Rules are not always just because these rules do not necessarily come from the best possible option that will benefit everyone and not only a particular sector of society. Now, and so when it comes to Philippine politics, I did some research. The historian Rinaldo Ileto wrote that the Philippine Revolution was actually suffering from a problem. There was an evil inherent in that revolution. In the same way as there is an evil that is happening right now. The evil is not the coronavirus. The evil actually is the lack of unity of Filipinos. Now, why is there evil? And why is there disunity? The reason, if we go into and dig into Philippine history, is that there is discrimination within society. Inside the revolution, according to Ileto, Aguinaldo represented the upper class, while Bonifacio, Sakay, and Muntalan were considered as lower class. And so, you know how the revolution ended? As Adrian Cristobal said, the greatest tragedy of the Philippine Revolution was the killing of the founder of the Katipunan, the Supremo, Andres Bonifacio. Now, what happened next is that when the Americans came into the country, they wanted to administer the country with ease. And to be able to do so, they made use of a system that was already put in place. And that system is based upon a centralized government anchored in Manila. And that centralized government persisted until the last decade, 2010 to 2016. And so what that means simply is that there was contestation and a perpetuation of the domination of the ruling class. And what is this perpetuation of this dominant ruling class all about? Every decision that happens in the land is actually rooted in a Manila-centric form of governance. Imagine this. A director for an agency in every city will have to get an appointment from Malacanang. And so that means, ergo, that every director in every city and every municipality will have to be approved by the president. Of course, we know for a fact that the president cannot do that. And what results, therefore, is nothing less than a patronage system of politics wherein Padrino system overcomes everything, and Padrino system becomes the very basis as to how people get the position, and not really the promotion and the protection of the interest of the public. And so, in that way, context is necessary for us to be able to understand what is happening to the country politically. And that context is no more than the conflict and contestation that has always been present in Filipino society in almost everything. There is that conflict and contestation. If somebody from the Liberal Party proposes something, someone from the opposition will go against that proposal. And as regard to the administration right now, it is expected that the Liberal Party or its members will go against this proposal. And that is the kind of politics that we have been put into. And that is the kind of politics that our citizens have been introduced into. But this kind of politics, however, wasn't Philippine made. It was a system that was set in place by our foreign conquerors. Why and how come? So that they can easily control us. And so therefore, whoever is put as part of the ruling class will use the same mechanism so that they can easily subjugate those who belong to the margins of society. And so this brings us to the kind of democracy that we have. It is what we call elitist. And it is based, according to Michael Colinani, on what we call ilustrado politics. Who is the ilustrado? The ilustrado is that wealthy, ethnically mixed intellectual. What does that mean? It means that for people in Mindanao, for people who live in Panabo City, for people who live in Tagum City, for people who live in Basilan, when it comes to national elections, they will have to vote for prominent and familiar names. And that includes the likes of Chis Escudero, Mar Rojas, Bam Aquino. These are the people that we assume possess the kind of standard necessary to hold power for national positions. And when we think, for instance, of local positions, down to the barrio level, we don't really put so much emphasis on intellectual pedigree. And so, what takes over in that respect are familiar relations. And so, for this reason, political dynasties are actually a result also of the elitist type of democracy in the country. Why elitist? Because we expect the leader to be highly educated. We expect this leader to be somebody who holds that very keen insight for him to be able to solve all our problems. And so politics in that respect is reduced into this kind of mindset, whereupon it's not actually the interest of the people, nor the ability of the people to recognize for themselves the roots and the solutions of their problems so that they can contribute well to policy, but rather it's about personalities. Who do you put there? Is this person summa cum laude? Is this person a graduate of UP? Is this person a lawyer? Is this person influential? And is this person really intelligent? So that becomes some sort of basis as regard to whom we believe we must put into positions of power. Yet, while a lot of us might not disagree with the fact that you need somebody who is virtuous and intelligent to hold that position, what it results to, however, is what we call the politics of exclusion. For the longest time, Mindanao was not considered as a part of the Philippines, both in theory and in practice. In 2010, I looked into the national budget for Region 11. The budget for infrastructure in 2010 was no more than 10 billion pesos. Last year, I looked into the budget for Region 11. The budget was 72 billion pesos. How come there was change? There was change because people from Mindanao decided to put their own son into Malacanang. Why are those people who are against the president saying bad things about that? Simple. It bespeaks of the kind of contestation and the kind of antagonism that we experience in this country. And so, the basis of this is not because you have a president who is disruptive, the basis of this is the historical context that we have been put into. And this Manila-centric governance is nothing short of a result of what we call a patron-client type of relationship. How does it happen? Say in the barrio, for example, you decide to get married. Who do you think should you get as your ninong? Will you look for the barangay tanod and get that barangay tanod as your sponsor? Of course not. You will look for at least the barangay captain because you know it will establish your connection. And in the same way, national politicians promise projects to provincial elites so that in the process, these provincial elites will also deliver votes for these national politicians. But why are these things happening? The simple reason that the disunity among Filipinos was the most efficient means for our foreign conquerors to take advantage of us. And so it is in this respect that elections in the Philippines are not really open. That's a basic principle in liberal theory. Elections must be open to everyone. But it can never be open to everyone because of the reality of politics in the Philippines. My problem, therefore, is how come these liberal scholars insist that this contextual radical politics that is happening will have to be undone. And we have to believe that reforms, liberal reforms for that matter, so that we give opportunities to everyone, or every poor man his due, will become the basis as regard to how we pursue the future for this country. We know for a fact that it cannot happen. We know that a UP student will court somebody from ADMO, or an ADMO student will court somebody from Lasal, and they will get married and they'll send their own child to the same high-end institution. And you know for a fact that somebody who studies at STI in Davao City cannot actually and almost impossibly marry somebody who's a graduate of De La Salle University, Top Avenue, Manila. Why is that so? That's because that is the context and reality of the kind of society in which we live. And so to believe that there is hope in politics, I suppose, is problematic. Why? Because culture and context, including history, is important for us to be able to understand why we have this sort of disruption, why we have this, quote unquote, according to his critics, populism that is happening right now. But of course, my argument is that it's not really the case that it's about this type of trajectory wherein there is that emphasis on how somebody is able to dictate and control the people. Precisely, this is happening because of the kind of historical context that has been built into the future of Philippine politics. And so, we go into the second part, the way of Rodrigo Duterte. Why did he rise? Why did he rise into power? Simple. Pinoy was weak. He was indecisive. But before that, how come we had a weak leader in Pinoy? Because Corazon Aquino did not bring equality among Filipinos after EDSA. She simply restored the old order. And so, it's kind of reality. The fact that the people who were in control during the Marcos regime are now back into power is something that you cannot really blame on the president. The president is simply taking advantage of the situation because he also has his own pragmatic type of governance. And he assumes that he needs to deliver to the people, and it is for this reason that he takes advantage of that position. But the fact that he is there, it's not because of him. It's because of the inability of our system to be able to bring about immediate and effective change and reforms on the lives of the people. And so, how did the president campaign? It's all about impact on the people, whereas his opponents were all about, say, pretension. Now, he campaigned, and this is, I suppose, valid, on rectifying the historical injustices against the Moros in Mindanao. And as Curato would mention, his program that is centered upon stopping criminality. Of course, we know that criminality hasn't stopped. And while many have died, drug problem still persists. And so the reason why people say bad things, for instance, against the president, is not really because the drug problem hasn't been solved, but it's really because it is our nature to contest whatever that man in Malacanang is doing. Regardless, whoever you put into that position, Pinoy was a moral person, and yet you realize Mama Sapano and Yolanda, how come? You know, why did he choose to go to a Mitsubishi like opening ceremony instead of, say, waiting for the arrival of 41 bodies who have sacrificed their lives for the sake of the Filipino people? How come the reaction to Yolanda was lax? Where was the national government during that very difficult situation on the part of the people in Tacloban? Pinoy was interviewed via CNN. And I think, you are all good teachers. He wouldn't pass your oral recitation had he been that student asked as to why the national government was slow in responding to Yolanda disaster problems. He mentioned it's the job of local government to be able to do that. Now, it's just common sense. Because of that type of sea swell, even policemen lost their lives. And so who will, in that respect, assume the responsibility? How come he did not really, did Bam not advise him that that's supposed to be done by somebody who is in a position to help? And so you cannot blame people in Tacloban for liking Rodrigo Duterte because he was the first local chief executive to arrive at the scene and help people in Tacloban. Now, it's not about Duterte again. It's about the sentiments of people. And it was his way to win that sentiment that catapulted him into power in Malacanang. Now, here, what type of politics does Duterte do? It is rooted in his peace and order campaign. And of course, Davao City is that model. In 1986, he was appointed as OIC Vice Mayor by then President Corazon Aquino. Davao at that time was very chaotic. There was this place you call Nicaragdao. It's a combination of Nicaragua, at that time a very dangerous country, and Agdao, a district at the center of Davao City. Now, there was the Sparrow unit and people have been killed almost daily. It was Duterte who was able to restore peace and order in the city of Davao. Secondly, Duterte recognized what we call the antagonism between Manila and Mindanao. For the longest time, Mindanao has been excluded. Imagine the ARMM. The ARMM has 4 million people. Not a single tertiary hospital exists in the ARMM. So you cannot blame, in that respect, somebody who lives in Basilan. This young kid who gets out, he has dreams to become the next astronaut. He has dreams to become the next Jeff Bezos. He has dreams to become the next lawyer, the next pilot. But when he gets out, he cannot idolize Chis Escudero or Bam Aquino. He can only idolize Abu Sabaya. Why? Because of the absence of opportunities. And so it was this kind of, say, trajectory that was taken advantage by the president so that people would believe in his campaign, which in the end catapulted him into that position. Now, according to Julio Tehanki, it's not actually the poor who voted for Duterte. You have to understand that it was actually the middle class. Why the middle class? To use a prominent term right now, nadala. They felt so much discomfort, and it was for this reason that President Duterte was seen as the best option as against someone who is no more than a copycat of the former president. One important thing that the president used in order to pursue his national position was the use of the Cebuano or Visayan language. Ato ni Bay, Bisaya na pud, gikan sa masa, resonated well with the people. And Rinaldo Eleto mentioned that that's also the way the leaders of the revolution converse with their men, because their men were ordinary peasants. While they were given instructions in the Spanish and English by many of those leaders at that time, the leaders of these small factions of the revolution, Muntalan, Sakay, they actually use the linguaje of the province in order to convince that there was meaning and there was reason to pursue and continue the revolt against the conquerors of the country. And so, to conclude the discussion on Duterte, it's just two things. You can either say that Duterte is radical or an autocrat. You can call him an autocrat, but if he is an autocrat, imagine an autocrat making Lucio Tan pay his NAIA Terminal 2 rent. If he were an autocrat, imagine mighty corporation paying the national government 45 billion in taxes. Isn't it that it would be more comfortable for them if Duterte were an autocrat to pay Duterte 10 billion so that they can save 35 billion instead of losing everything? And imagine the 12 billion that the Manila Water and Maynilad conceded because they were threatened, quote unquote, by the president that their concession agreement will have to be cancelled. And then secondly, Duterte, unlike Aquino, was able to pass the Bangsang Moro Organic Law. And so an autocrat passed the Bangsang Moro Organic Law, which means that 5% of national revenue will go to our Muslim brothers. And that also means that there is autonomy in the ARMM for them to be able to do what they want and decide their own fate as a people who treasure their culture, way of life, and religion. Even then, you have Boracay that was cleaned, you have the Marawi seeds that was put into a conclusion, and yet they say that Duterte is an autocrat. Well, it depends on which side you are in. But the point here, it's about contestation. You can either say he's radical or he is an autocrat. And you have ABS-CBN. On this end, it's easy to say that that might be a very despotic act. But consider the Lopezes. He labels them as an oligarch. And they are, as always, untouchable in Philippine society and politics. And yet, imagine somebody from Mindanao, an unknown before 2016, was able to close the biggest television channel in the country. Well, you can say that he's an autocrat, but at the same time, you can also say that he's that first person to be able to defeat an oligarch. Now, let's go to Carl Gaspar. I am aware that I have little time. Now, I sent this to Carl Gaspar because I don't want to say things here that he wouldn't like. What Carl Gaspar actually does, according to him, is that he's also fighting what we call hegemony. What is this hegemony? It is rooted in the faith experience. And what is this? Say, imagine what Vicente Rafael wrote in Contracting Colonialism. Christianity had a double purpose, and that is to introduce the gospel, which is good, of course. Anybody who patterns his life to Jesus Christ is somebody who will be blessed. Yet at the same time, this faith experience also is about the domination of the Filipino people. And Gaspar says in his latest book that Christianity is hegemonic because it actually has deprived the Lumads of their sense of identity. And the priors in that regard, according to him, stole from them their sacred land. And even right now, state and society attempts to destroy the way of life of the Lumad. And so, whenever we talk about praying to the mountains, praying to the river, praying to the balite tree, we say bad things about the Lumads doing so. Why is that? Because according to Gaspar, we judge that such forms of worship are nothing but inferior compared to institutional religion. Gaspar, like Duterte, and Gaspar agrees to this, is a progressive. And the basis for his radical attitude, according to him, was Vatican II. He wanted changes in society. He fought the Marcos dictatorship, and as a result, he was incarcerated for 22 months. Duterte was the fiscal at that time when the case against Carl Gaspar was filed for insurgency. Yet, even with this incarceration, according to Brother Carl, he proceeded with his advocacy for conscientization. What is this about? It's about the meaning of one's faith. The social justice is not just erecting an edifice and promoting an advocacy and putting into position those plans, policies, and even principles that we deem promotes the rights and values of the people, when in fact it only benefits those who are in positions of power. And so what Gaspar did in his activism is actually he lived with, wrote for, and fought against those who have exploited the lumads. For instance, the big mining and logging firms. And so the second to the last slide is about the cries of indigenous people. The indigenous people has been those people that the good brother has cared for. And he's fighting not small enemies in this respect. He's fighting big corporations who are out there to exploit and extract from the way of life of indigenous peoples. Why is that happening? The reason is simple. The state lacks political will. Abinales and Amoroso say the persistent inability of the state to provide basic services, guarantee peace and order, and foster economic development is the reason why we have the kind of society that we have, unjust and severely unequal. Gaspar is a critique of Duterte. He says there has been a paucity of visionary ideas that would inspire the people to downplay their own personal interests in favor of that of the nation. The two were actually classmates at Holy Cross of Digos, now Correzo College. In conclusion, what sort of radicalism do we find in the two paths that these great men are pursuing? Both are fighting a hegemonic system. Duterte, however, is part of the political system that he seeks to dismantle. Gaspar, on the other hand, is within the system of a religion that he says is hegemonic. And in that respect, there is similarity between them. Duterte and Gaspar recognize Philippine politics as inherently contested. It's a fight between the affluent and the powerless, but they differ in terms of their strategic loci. Duterte is used to political power, while Gaspar is with the marginalized. Gaspar has criticized Duterte's war on drugs and alleged that the president has actually committed human rights violations. Duterte, on the other hand, invokes the common good as basis for his progressive style. But while this is the case, the president still has 91% trust ratings. My assumption is it's not about the president. It's about the Filipinos. It's about us. We demand change from our leaders, but we cannot change ourselves. And so the problem in that respect is not Duterte. In the same way, when those people in social media who constantly bash me for promoting radicalism in politics, the enemy is not me. The enemy is not even the president. The real enemy is ourselves. Thank you and pleasant evening to all.
Hello, Dr. Mabolic. Thank you
Yes, good evening.
for insightful talk po. So for today, we will be proceeding to the open forum. So we'll invite everyone to uh, to post your questions in the chat box. Okay. So I think we also have Dr. Raniel who raised his hand. Okay, Doc, you may ask your question po if ever.
Okay, pwede na akong magano, Mr. Patrick?
Yes, yes, Doc. Go ahead po.
Okay. First and foremost, congratulations sir sa talk niyo po, Sir Mabolic.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you for the different lessons and different elaborations that you provide a while ago. No? Maybe just a clarification po, sir. Um, of course, Duterte's rise into power may be radical in many ways. No? One is because what he offers is something different from the traditional elite democracy. No? That is very apparent in our political system. No? But of course, it does not mean that when something is different, it is automatically radical. And at the same time, it is as if po, sir, na you are only using elite democracy as a homogeneous concept. Ang position ko po kasi, sir, is that I think Duterte, even though he disempowered an elite democracy, created another kind of an elite democracy. No? In after overthrowing a hegemony, introduce another kind of hegemony. However, what makes him different from the previous, yung sila Aquino and the rest, is that he's really, how should I call this? He's really good using populism or populist language in perhaps convincing people about the radicality of his action. So ang question ko, sir, is how radical is his kind of governance, no? Considering the fact that he is introducing a new kind of hegemony, and at the same time, against the backdrop of the suppression of media, the anti-terror law, our subservience to China, and the state repression of state universities. So how can you, kumbaga, sir, reconcile your claim of his radicality given the cases or the problems that I provided po? Okay. Ilan po, sir. Thank you po.
Thank you, Doc Raniel, for the question. Firstly, with regard to your question, there's a problem of, say, where the emphasis should be put. The problem really of those who criticize the president is we emphasize on him, say, personality-based type of attack. What I'm trying to do in my position with regard to the possibility of him winning the presidency, although it was quite impossible at that time, is the fact that Filipinos actually can be open to certain changes. Although I would also say that your suggestions that closing ABS-CBN is another type of hegemony, there is no problem. And while it's clear that the president has not been really effective in effecting reforms and changes, the point of the matter is, my emphasis is, if we Filipinos really look into our political problems, we must understand that we have always been focusing on personalities, and yet we forget the real fight. It's not about Duterte or those who belong to the opposition. It's about the kind of country that we want. And so this means that if it was possible for somebody from Mindanao to win the presidency, then there's nothing impossible for the Filipino people as regard to the kind of politics that they have. Now, I also mentioned in the paper, and actually in a 2019 article that was published, that the predatory nature of the Philippine state still remains, because the fact of the matter is that Duterte has remained a pragmatic politician. And so, in that sense, emphasis here should never be a criticism against Duterte, because Duterte will be gone several months from now. And yet, we Filipinos actually do not know what will happen next. And so, what I'm trying to say here is it's not really about this individual or this person. It's about the context and the possibility that can ultimately be made possible if Filipinos only consider that these types of conflict and contestation have been present. And yet, without Duterte, people would not have realized that we have been electing the likes of Bam Aquino, the likes of Pinoy, not because they are also fit for the job, but because they belong to that standard upon which we believe that a politician should be an ilustrado. Duterte, of course, belonged to the elite. His parents are not like ordinary people. And the fact that he has been mayor in Davao City for 2 decades and his children are also in positions of power mean that he is not some politician. He's somebody who is also powerful as a player when it comes to politics. And yet, the problem really of his critics is that we emphasize on his traits. And yet we forget why in the first place did the Filipinos, the whole country, elect somebody from Mindanao. Had it not been Duterte, then no one would from Mindanao would win the presidency. But why Duterte? I suppose it's not really because Duterte is Duterte. It was because there was somebody who possessed certain traits that Filipinos liked. It could have been Anton Heinrich Renesland if Filipinos believe that he also possessed that political will. And so Duterte won not because Duterte was Duterte. Duterte won because Pinoy was weak. What does that mean? It means that elite democracy has failed the Filipinos. EDSA has failed the Filipino people. Cory has failed the Filipino. And it is for this reason that this contestation continues. And because of that, we will continue to find politicians who are like this president. Thank you, Ranil.
Okay po, Doc. I think we can, or unless Dr. Ranil would perhaps say a few words po before.
Okay na, Patrick.
Sige
Thank
po,
you, Sir
Doc.
Ryan.
Hey, salamat, Ranil.
Okay po, so if we could turn our attention to the chat box, we have a question from Mr. Michael Roland Hernandez. If you would allow me to read the question. How consistent is the idea of Duterte's apparent radicalization of politics as anti-oligarch and pro-poor with the fact that the most of the victims of his war on drugs are the poor? Don't you think that your radicalization of Duterte's politics masks a short-sighted assessment of the fact that his political ideology and practice have always been powered by an autocracy or monarchy worse than neoliberal elitist bourgeois system that he uh, apparently seeks to supplant? Is agonism in this case merely another word for selective subjectivism in the conduct of politics at the expense of rational political discourse?
Okay, so maraming salamat, Michael, although you used the word short-sighted. Anyways, if you ask me about his consistency, of course, he is inconsistent. I'm not radicalizing Duterte for Christ's sake. So what I'm saying is that Duterte is one of those instances, one of those manifestations upon which Filipinos might be able to radicalize the kind of politics, that there is always an alternative to the liberal types of reforms, that there is always an alternative to the agenda presented by those who belong to the elite and most powerful of the land. And so it's not about Duterte, Jesus Christ. Also. It's about that possibility for the Filipino people to really look into what is the alternative. And when we look into this alternative, say for instance, you come to your house and your father tells you, these are my rules, these are the principles that you are to follow. And you ought to follow this because I am your father. In the same way as You know, our conquerors came and then they designed the systems and the rules, and then the elites took over, and then they're telling the Filipino people, this is our Congress, this is the Senate, this is what Bam Aquino thinks, this is what Jesus Cordero thinks, and so you must believe what they think because they are in positions of power. Now here's somebody who is a barber, and then he says, no, you are wrong. He will tell the people, these people are wrong. Will this barber win? Of course he will not win. To fight a monster, to fight an evil, you must be another evil yourself. But precisely, politics is not about morality. The problems of the rebels is that they think that they are always right. And the problems of those who think that they assume they are right is that they don't want to listen to other voices. And so, he is unfriendly. He is unsmiling. That's not because of him. You don't smile inside your house. It's not because you are not smiling. You don't smile because of the situation inside your house. And so when we ask ourselves about his consistency, he is not consistent because a politician is no more than a reflection of the kind of people that he represents. That is my position. I'm sorry if you cannot accept my position and you say it's short-sighted, Jesus Christ. You're like making an anonymous comment to an article.
Okay po. Thank you for the question po, Sir Michael. And we
Your
proceed to
question was
another.
very profound, and thank you for the question. And I'm happy with the question. Okay.
Okay. Thank you po, Dr. Ryan. So we have another question po from Sir Jeffrey Bartlett. A
Yes, Jeff.
portion of your a portion of your conclusion is quite controversial. You mentioned that the real enemy is ourselves. Would you reconsider this conclusion given that the many of our people exhibited care, concern, goodness, and mutual aid, especially whenever our communities experience difficulties and crises? For example, natural disasters and armed conflicts, etc.
Mhm.
Doc?
Okay, maraming salamat, Jeff, sa question. You are correct, Jeff, but take it as a metaphorical thing. Of course, you cannot blame the poor for their poverty. They are poor because they have been taken advantage by the system. You cannot blame the victims of the war on drugs because they themselves are victims. What I'm trying to say is, as a people, what kind of people are we? And are we even a people? Are we even a nation? Do we even respect each other? Do we even value each other? Do we even listen to each other? Do we even give people a chance? Do we even see that there are other things worth considering? Do we even give opportunities to those whom we believe do not have the chance in life? And so by people, we mean we have to consider what precisely we mean by being a Filipino. And of course, our conquerors did not want us to realize they want to destroy that sense of identity. And precisely because it is easier to control a people if they do not realize that. And so this disunity, this whole problem is rooted in the fact that we actually do not listen to each other and that we do not see ourselves as one nation. There's Mindanao and then there's Manila. There's like, of course, UP and the others. And so this whole kind of problem is translated to all other facets of human life, including politics. And so that to me is the reason why I mentioned, well, of course, I will not mention that in the paper, why I mentioned that we are the kind of monsters that we ourselves will have to tackle and say the kind of problems that we ourselves will have to solve. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay po, thank you for the question, Sir Jeff and Dr. Ryan for the answer. But unfortunately, since we have a limited time and we already have decided to end our plenary lecture for today, again, we congratulate Dr. Christopher Ryan
Christopher.
Mabolic. Sorry po, Christopher Ryan Mabolic for
Bilang Patrick.
his presentation or his lecture for tonight.
Okay. Lastly, sabihin ko lang, Patrick, okay lang magsalita, Patrick?
Oh, go ahead po, Doc.
Kaya kung sinulat ito, alam niyo good. Kasi pag magsulat tayo ng mga bagay na everybody will agree, hindi na dapat pag-usapan. So, if we want things to be discussed and debated upon, then we have to challenge ideas. No man is perfect. No idea is perfect. Not even the best, like professor is perfect. We have to challenge ideas. And the only way for us to be able to challenge ideas, get published, and get cited is to put forward contentious ideas. Otherwise, there's no discussion. Otherwise, there's no meaning to being into this field we call ethics and philosophy. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay po, Doc. Thank you po for the words of wisdom.
Hindi yan
Okay
words of
po.
wisdom, Patrick. Basta, hindi yan words of wisdom. Basta, sabi ko lang yan. Basta, I'm happy. You should be happy you have a pretty co-host, di ba? So, it's like that. So, anyways, thank you. Bakit hindi nagtanong si Jillian? Tawa-tawa lang. Dapat magtanong din. Parang lamay itong ginagawa natin last night. Parang lamay. Jesus Christ. We have to be talking. Di ba? Dapat mag-away tayo. Kasi without conflict, antagonism. Kung walang away, walang pagmamahalan, Jillian. Okay. Thank you.
Okay po, thank you. Thank you. Julian?
Okay, so, echoing the final remarks of Dr. Mabolic, to continue the discourse, we move on to the next speaker. Okay, so we have two other speakers for tonight. So, to keep the ball rolling, I would want to introduce you to our next speaker. He is an MA candidate student from the University of Santo Tomas Graduate School, presenting his paper entitled Localizing Prudence in the Capital Punishment of Aquinas and the Death Penalty in the Philippines. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Floren de Vera.
Hi po, good evening. Narinig na po ba ako?
Yes, rinig po.
Thank you po. Share ko lang po yung screen po. Di po. Nakikita na po ba yung ano ko?
Yep.
Okay po. Okay po. This paper is entitled Localizing Prudence in the Capital Punishment of Aquinas and the Death Penalty in the Philippines. So for the introduction, the aim of this presentation is to present first prudence and whether it is something to be found in the capital punishment of St. Thomas Aquinas. Second, whether the death penalty in the Philippines is necessary. And third, whether prudence and capital punishment are persuasive to the reimposition of the death penalty in the Philippines. So prudence for St. Thomas Aquinas is said that prudence is the thing to be done. It is the right reason to action. It is also called practical wisdom because it is directly linked between reason and action. With the integration of the will, prudence, after counsel and judgment, presents the action to be done and avoided upon command. As an intellectual virtue, prudence inheres in and pertains to the intellect, but is always directed to the practical life, right reason applied to what is done. Prudence therefore sets the means for the moral virtues and directs them toward their ends. It is often described as one of the moral virtues. For Aquinas, prudence pertains directly to the active life, the life of the individual and society. Although Aquinas makes space for individuals' accounts of prudence, he sternly warns that the regard to good to one's individual self over the common good would be an offense against charity. Indeed, the paradigm displays of prudence in his account are forms of public leadership, running the state, which seeks the flourishing of one's community and therefore of oneself. So, kita po natin ang link between prudence and it is gearing toward the multitude. Prudence toward the common good. Since it belongs to prudence rightly to counsel, judge, and command concerning the means of obtaining a due end, it is evident that prudence regards not only the private good of the individual, but also the common good of the multitude. Hence, we call it a political prudence. Political prudence is directed to the common good of the state or kingdom. Consequently, now it is evident that there is a special and perfect kind of governance in one who has to govern not only himself, but also the perfect community of a city or a kingdom. Hence, prudence, in its special and most perfect sense, belongs to a king who is in charge of the government. In the words of Glenn, reigning prudence belongs to those who legislate and exercise government. So where is prudence in the capital punishment? Such description of prudence led further to the investigation whether it exists as a necessary element of capital punishment. So we promptly ask, does anyone out there deserve capital punishment? The answer Aquinas gives as explicitly written in Summa Theologica and in the Summa Contra Gentiles evidently is a resounding yes. So Aquinas' capital punishment, concisely in the Summa Contra Gentiles, certain men must be removed by death from the society of men. The ruler of a state executes pestiferous men justly and sinlessly. And in the Summa Theologica, therefore, if a man be dangerous and infectious to the community on account of some sin, it is praiseworthy and advantageous that he be killed in order to safeguard the common good. So prudence and the capital punishment still, as prudence ever is the right reason of things to be done, and the right reason to applied action, Aquinas describes how prudence forms part in the execution of capital punishment by the authority in charge of the community. So the illustrations of political prudence in the capital punishment, in the Summa Contra Gentiles, men who are in authority over others do no wrong when they reward the good and punish the evil. Judges do no wrong in punishing the wicked. By analogy, the physician quite properly and beneficially cuts off a diseased organ if the corruption of the body is threatened because of it. Therefore, the ruler of a state executes pestiferous men and men justly and sinlessly in order that the peace of the state may not be disrupted. And Aquinas even lifted a source from the Bible. Hence, put away the evil one from among yourselves. And finally, the fact that the evil, as long as they live, can be corrected from their errors does not prohibit the fact that they may be justly executed, for the danger which threatens from their way of life is greater and more certain than the which they may be expected from their improvement. In the Summa Theologica, the illustrations, our Lord commanded them to forbear from uprooting the cockle in order to separate the wheat. Wherefore, our Lord teaches that we should rather allow the wicked to live, that vengeance is to be delayed until the last judgment, rather than that the good be put to death together with the wicked. When, however, the good incur no danger, rather are protected and saved by the slaying of the wicked, then the latter may be lawfully put to death. And according to the order of his wisdom, God sometimes slays sinners forthwith in order to deliver the good, whereas sometimes he allows them time to repent, according as he knows their hearts. It puts to death those who are dangerous to others, while it allows time for repentance to those who sin without grievously harming the good. These are illustrations of how things to be done, how to weigh consequences and indict the guilty, because it is a matter of deliberation. So death penalty in the Philippines. Suspended ang death penalty po ngayon, kaya i-continue ko na po ngayon to. 4 months ago, Inquirer posted in an article, the Senate has kept the revival of the death penalty a hot button issue in the Philippines on top of the Chamber's legislative agenda for 2021, according to the Senate President Soto. The President Duterte asked Congress to reimpose capital punishment during his State of the Nation address, and demand cases resuscitating the death penalty, aside from the government's the revival of death penalty against perpetrators of heinous crimes or illegal drug-related offenses, citizens are also airing concurrence to its necessity with regard to infamous cases to it, but not limited to the extrajudicial killings. Well, ang sikat na the killing of Ian De Los Santos noong 2017, yung Tarlac shooting noong 2020, na pinatay yung dalawang mag-ina, and the Sawan rape case, yung sa Lapu-Lapu po, tapos ang dami pang rape cases, and the prevalent tanimbala, tanimbaril. And lastly, for synthesis, persuasion, I hope to persuade you. Prudence suffuses all moral virtues such as justice, and justice requires us to love and give what is due to one another, even to our enemies out of charity. But how do we love our enemies? Aquinas says, but if in a particular case we add that a man is a murderer or dangerous to society, to kill him is good, that he live is an evil. Hence it may be said of a just judge, but nonsense, REP. When, however, they fall into very great wickedness and become incurable, we ought no longer to show them friendliness. For it is this reason that both divine and human laws command such like sinners to be put to death, because there is greater likelihood of their harming others than of their mending ways. Nevertheless, the judge puts into effect not out of hatred for the sinners, but out of love for charity, by reason of which he prefers the public good to the life of the individual. Philippines in the habit of legislation may look into Aquinas' concept of capital punishment as it is an assemblage of forces, quote unquote, in it, as it is a rhizomic with other principles of laws, human dignity, sin, charity, justice, the common good, which I did not present here, but it should be looked forward furthermore. May the government exercise prudence and refrain from administering justice unvirtuously and injudiciously. We should learn from Aquinas para hindi masabi na ang hustisya ay para sa mga may pera lamang or yung tinatawag po natin na justice delayed, justice denied. So we have to let justice prevail, that even the justices, judges, corrupt government officials are not deserving of capital punishment from harming the common good in which every one of us partakes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you po Sir Mar for your presentation po.
Ang short lang po. Okay.
Okay. So thank you for your presentation, Sir Mar Floren de Vera. So we can now proceed to the open forum. Again, we invite everyone to place their questions in the chat box, and please be reminded, of course, of our time constraints that we may not accommodate all questions for tonight. So, ayun po. Again, do we have any questions po? You may also raise your hand po if you like to.
Okay, so maybe the others are still trying to think of a question. Maybe I can start first off. Um, I think when it comes to any type of policies that refers to a form of punishment, the problem here is here in the Philippines is basically efficiency. Um, kung hindi maayos yung pagpalaganap ng mga batas and yung the punishment as well, um, everything else follows it. I mean, everything else is affected. So when it comes to efficiency in this sense, maybe that is the better approach when it comes to siguro sa pagpalaganap na ng punishments. Do you have any thoughts with this po, Sir Mark?
Alin
Nawala po kayo.
Nawawala ako, sorry. Siguro, paano ba? Sa execution po ng mga laws po natin.
Medyo nawawala po yung audio.
Hello po, hello.
Yes, hi.
Hello. Okay. Maybe the problem is the implementation of our policies and laws in the Philippines, or sometimes maybe they are clouded with their selfish motives. That's why napaka-importante ang prudence, because when we say that a police official, masasabi po natin na of course he is professional, degree in the same degree niya na-apply niya. But then special process of implementation kapag maganda yung understanding na doon, pagka may prudence ka, it is yung tinatawag din na puso. Sinasamahan mo ng konting puso yung trabaho mo, yung gano'n. Yes, kailangan na ng konting puso para implement ito para walang variance, para
Sorry, can you repeat po the last few statements? Medyo nagiging choppy po eh.
sorry. Yung sinasabi na ito puso ni St. Thomas Aquinas, maybe perhaps it is, yes, yun ang prudence. Oo. Sometimes, aside from the scientific degree that we have, samahan natin ng konting ganun. Laanan natin ng it's the language of the heart, kumbaga. I think that's prudence in our parlance, native parlance.
Thank you po. The floor is still open for questions. So, maybe some of you are still typing it down.
Hi, sir. Siguro just to keep the discussion going din. Actually, ang isa sa inaantay ko pa sa discussion niyo is kung paano nyo mai-actualize yung idea ng death penalty. Of course, prudence when it comes to the typology of laws ni Aquinas. Diba? Parang it's something na inantay ko rin. Pero ang gusto ko actually tanongin when it comes to death penalty and everything. And nasabi nyo nga, merong prudence pa rin yun. Merong parang call of the heart, may language nga ng puso and everything. Pero yun sa na-present nyo, ang parang naging prescriptive way lang may Aquinas kung paano mag-execute ang death penalty is through, hanging. Well, do you think po here nowadays in the modern society, ano tingin mo yung way kung paano ma-prescribe ni Aquinas ang isang form of death penalty na may prudence pa rin in a way? Ayun ba?
Siguro, of course, ang pinakamaganda siguro na death penalty pa natin is lethal injection. Of course, gone are the days na we hang people, we torture them. Ganun siguro. That's why, pero ang mahal ng death penalty natin pagka legal injection, di ba? Kasi ang daming mga professional na mag-a-assist din doon, di ba? So, titignan din natin kung paano siya i-implement. Oo. Kasi I think it's the most bloodless, and at the same time, it's the most subtle way for us to, to put a certain perpetrator of committed, mga crimes, mga ganyan dito sa country natin, di ba? Kasi naman, pa natin sa silya elektrika, di ba? Maano din yun. Brutal din yun na isa.
At to add na rin din po doon, there is some reason kaya naging lethal injection na din yung preferred. Kasi the thing is we're above electrocutions, we're above barbarism, so the lethal injections, yeah, it is what should be done as the current mode for capital punishment.
Yeah.
Okay, so Andre, would you want to say something?
As oh, we already have one question po. Yung nga po, well, as a sabi ni Sir Christian Solis, as a Catholic country, in your opinion, should capital punishment be introduced again?
Well, wishful thinking ko ito, given the fact, given the chance na ang government natin ang pangit din ng ano natin, no, ng imprison, ng mga cells natin, mga kulungan. And at the same time, should we reintroduce restricted, what makes it a restricted punishment? Maybe because of anong tawag natin dito? Of confusion of anong tawag dito? Of our understanding of moral value of death, and at the same time, anong tawag dito? Yung our inability to administer it, yung sabi ko nga, judiciously and invirtuously. So I think there is really a need to impose death penalty to our country, because makikita naman natin na when we apply it asks the person to put to death out of anger, but we seek some good, which is the common good, diba?
Okay, if we have no more questions, we can end here. And again, we congratulate Sir Mar Floren de Vera for his presentation. Ayun po, we give him a virtual round of applause na lang po kung pwede po yun. Okay, Sir,
Thank you, Patrick.
Sir Mar, thank you again. And we now again proceed to our next speaker, Jillian.
Okay, so on to our final speaker for tonight. A short introduction. He is a Master's of Philosophy, Master of Arts in Philosophy student at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He studied philosophy at the Immaculate Conception Major Seminary and is currently serving as faculty at Chiang Kai-shek College. So, presenting his paper entitled Christianity, Politics, and the Problem of the Will, please welcome Joshua Cedric Gundayao.
Good evening, everyone. If it's all right, I would first present with my camera off so as not to, what do you call this, affect the connection of the internet for a while. Okay. So good evening again. Allow me to present to you my paper entitled Christianity, Politics, and the Problem of the Will. This paper is an attempt to see the relationship between Christianity and Philippine politics, particularly on how baptized Filipinos exercise their political lives. This paper springs from the realization that to be a Christian is a lifelong journey that is not completed after baptism. To be a baptized Christian is one thing. To live a Christian life is another. The Spaniards only baptized the early Filipino people, but it is up for us Filipinos to incorporate gospel values into our own lives. The nature of the opus will focus on the evaluation and analysis of Christianity and Philippine politics. In line with this, the paper will not focus on the historical aspect of Philippine Christianization, nor would it examine and evaluate the ways how the Spaniards Christianized the Philippine archipelago. In discussing politics, it would not revolve on the legality of the laws being enacted by the government, nor about the nature of the Philippine government as such. Although this paper will discuss how Filipino Christians exercise their political lives, the paper will not dwell on the argument of whether the separation of church and state should always be kept. The paper will simply establish the reality that some Filipino Christians, in exercising their political lives, bifurcates from the Christian values expected from them through baptism. Due to the problem between Christian values and politics, this paper will highlight the problem of the will as the reason why some, if not most, of the Filipinos are having difficulty living the values of Christianity. Being baptized and catechized does not mean that you already embodied the faith. To fix the duality of life in contemporary Filipino, this paper will advocate for the rectification of the will as a means towards incorporating the knowledge and wisdom obtained through Christianity into Filipinos' daily lives. There is two contentions on when did Christianity reaches the shores of the Philippines, which is not yet named as such during that period. According to Venko, some of the Europeans already reached the Philippine archipelago carrying with them Christianity through the person of Franciscan friar by the name of Blessed Odorico de Perdon of Italy. This tradition directs the beginning of Philippine Christianization in the land of Bolinao, Pangasinan, where some believe to be the place where the friars celebrated the first Mass in the pre-Spanish Philippine soil around 1324. On the other hand, many cleave to the idea that Christianity entered the archipelago in 1251 through the Spaniards. According to Gutierrez, explorers landed on the land of Limasawa when they reached the archipelago. Following this tradition, it is further believed that the first Easter Mass was celebrated on the same place, on the said place rather. The local church in the Philippines seems to favor the latter tradition. In fact, the year 2021 was designated to be the 500-year anniversary of the arrival of Christian faith in the country. Whatever is the tradition of Christianization is to be sought, what is important is that Christianity is not primordial to the Filipinos. Through Christianization, some of the early Filipinos transitioned from polytheistic belief to a monotheistic faith. There's a movement from the natural deities to the transcendent God, from the pagan Anito to the worship of the Christ in the person of the Santo Niño. As time goes by, Christianity became deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of the Filipino people, resulting in most of its inhabitants becoming baptized members of Catholicism. However, despite the tremendous impact of Christianity on the Filipino people and in the Philippines at large, it is not uncommon today to see baptized Filipino Catholics and Christians supporting political agendas and ideologies which is not in line with Christian values. The Spaniards baptized the Filipinos, but the perfection of Christianization was not achieved. It is because some Filipinos separate their political ideologies from the virtues being taught by the gospel. It is as if the person who enters the church is different from the person that exercises the political life. As a result, there's a duality of life in some Filipinos, a Christian and a political one. In every election, many Filipinos espouse different political parties and candidates whom they think can resolve the different problems that the Philippines is facing. Moreover, these political candidates become pseudo-messiahs that promises to resolve and arrest the daily ordeal of ordinary citizens. Due to the promises made by aspiring government officials and the desperation of the people to find comfort from the hostile societal problem, some Filipinos are willing to fight and argue with their fellow citizens in order to support the candidates that they espouse. As a result, regardless of the failure and immoral acts or decisions done by the said pseudo-messiahs, the people can easily rationalize it in favor of their leader because they think that there is no one apart from their leader who can address the issues at hand. Apart from the colorful event of election, which is characterized by speeches, promises, tarpaulins, and promotions on various platforms, the Philippine politics is also known because of corruption and injustice. According to Batala, in the Philippines, grand corruption knows no political regime. Its occurrences has been observed in both authoritarian and democratic governments. Aside from corruption, recently, the focus of international concern was centered in the Philippines due to numerous issues regarding human rights violation. In the past years, human rights violation become all the more hostile due to the rising number of extrajudicial killing. According to Johnson and Fernquest, the Philippine human rights advocates claimed that the number of killings was beyond 16,000. To date, there's still a lot of EJK cases that happens on a regular basis. Despite the Philippine president's supportive remark regarding this bloody war against drugs, there are still a lot of supporters that approve the methodology being employed. As Filipino Christian, there is the duty that is needed to be performed. Duty to the nation and duty to God. Both politics and Christian piety aims for the good. For politics, it is order and justice that are being sought, while for Christian piety, it is the virtues of the gospel that is being pursued. Due to the current circumstances, it is easy to fall into the trap of seeing the good of politics as opposed to the good of religion. In reality, both politics and religion rather, aims at the perfection of the human person, simply viewed from different perspectives, but do not necessarily mean contradictory to each other. The corrupted nature of man makes the harmony of Christian values and political ideologies difficult. For some, Christian values seem to be confined only inside the four corners of the material church. That the mandate of being virtuous is only active when people are clutching different religious articles such as the rosaries. According to Janilo, the most immediate effect of various debates on the church regarding what is happening in the society, particularly in politics, results in the fragmentation of Christian community. Despite of constant reminders from various Christian leaders, Filipino Christians took different positions regarding the problem that we face today. As authentic Filipino Christians, there is a duty for the Filipinos to harmonize their political lives with their religious life. The human person cannot be fragmented in the same way that the Christian in him cannot be separated from the citizen within him. Due to this, there's the demand to transcend the difference between the two by identifying which possess the higher good. In this case, it is the higher good that should always take precedence. The higher good brought about by Christianity should serve as the moral compass on how Christian Filipino obtain lower goods as he or she exercises his or her political life. According to Bonaventure, grace is bestowed and infused directly by God. Through the grace received in baptism, Christian within them obtain within them a guide on how to pursue the good and the capacity to do it. However, it should be clear that baptism does not override the capacity of man to will things. The capacity of man to will things is still there. That is why the duty of harmonizing his political and religious life only depends on him. When Christianity arrives in the Philippines, the locals received the grace of baptism and became Christians. Baptism does not remove Baptism only removes original sin from the person, but it does not address the effects of sin, which is the corruption that the person inhibits. Hence, apart
Joshua,
from
excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, but on our end, the slides aren't moving. Maybe you have the presenter view on. Thanks.
okay, but it is moving. How can I proceed?
Yep. Because we see the whole screen,
Okay.
yung title and yung ano.
Okay, maybe I can
Yes, yes, that will
navigate
be better.
like
Thank you.
that this way. Na lang, I'll navigate it this way.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sorry for that. Where am I? Okay. Okay. The call for genuine Christianization is done through the exercise of Christian values that is mandated by the gospel. True enough, according to Ratzinger, in being a Christian, the decisive thing is rather the interior existential transformation for which any outward circumstances and activities are only a preparation. What is external only predisposes the person for a much deeper internal transformation that only happens within him and is hidden from the naked eye. The bifurcation of the human person happens when only some parts of a person's life are Christianized. Ratzinger further added that the disintegration of human soul is caused precisely by the fact that its faculties are idling. There is a disintegration within the person simply because the will is not directed towards the values that Christianity necessitates from the person. The bifurcation of the human person arises from the inability of man to rectify his or her will by making it passive and somewhat exempted from the process of Christianization. In the rectification of the will, the aim is to put the will once again in conformity with the summum bonum, which is no other than God. In medieval times, the philosopher by the name Bonaventure offers a triple way as a means of rectifying the will. These activities render the soul back to God through the aid of grace. This activity is an ongoing process through which the soul of the faithful person becomes as it like as possible to God, is led back to God, and comes to experience a greater measure of union with God. The goal of this is not only to rectify man's will by inclining it back to its original focus, but also it aims to intensify the imago Dei in man that was tainted by sin. There are three activities in order to achieve rectification. namely purgation, illumination, and perfection. The purgation consists in the expulsion of one's sins, illumination deals with the imitation of Christ, and perfection ascribes to the union of the heavenly spouse. These hierarchical acts intend to perfect the soul by means of its reformation through the aid of grace, and these acts aid man in fighting the effects of malum on the powers of the soul, more particularly on ignorance and concupiscence. In the postmodern Philippines, it is not impossible to see faithful Christians who support unchristian political agendas. Due to the present circumstance that the Philippine nation is facing, there is a radical call to fully incorporate Christian values into the daily lives. A Christian should always be a Christian at all times, at all places, and at all given circumstances. In doing so, rectification of an erring will is necessary. Beyond the intellectual formation of discovering the truths of faith and the magisterium of the church, there is a demand for a more radical moral formation that would accompany Christians in the never-ending process of rectifying their will. After all, the process of Christianization never ends after baptism. Thank you, and that would be all.
Okay, thank you, Sir Joshua Cedric Gundayao, for your presentation. At this point, we again proceed for our to our open forum. Again, we invite everyone to place your chat in your comments in the chat box for your questions. Thank you very much. Okay, sir. So siguro just to keep the discussion going po. Uh, Gusto ko pong tanungin yung idea pa ng uh, the idea yung gusto kong discussion yung on the idea of the will and how yun po yung way ko paano maging truly Christian. Pero ang observation ko lang actually is that despite that the country is of course a Catholic country and maraming Catholic schools ang madaming Catholic schools that produces Catholic graduates din. But unfortunately po, and ironically, parang Catholic schools parang mas madaming pinoproduce na atheists or mga nakakaroon ng distrust ang mga Catholic schools nowadays. Well, I don't know if my assessment is correct about it, pero that's a kind of a common thing din. I mean, in UST, you would meet a lot of people na nagkakaroon ng a form of distrust din. Well, I think it's not much more about the will siguro, or probably pwede rin may kinalaman sa will. Pero hindi kaya yung religious life kaya ng mga Christians who enroll in Christian or in Catholic schools nakakaroon ng distrust in the way kung paano siguro sila nililive yung life. Kaya parang halimbawa parang parating ganito yung teaching and at the same time they have been taking it in a very negative light. Na parang nakikita nila yung pagsimba sa parang nagiging routinary na lang kasi sinabi ng simbahan na ganito ganyan. Diba? Hindi kaya parang may factor din yung the way kung paano yung Christian life na tinuturo ang Christian life when it comes to this. Sir.
Okay, thank you. I guess the formation of Christians as generally dapat twofold eh. I would agree with you that some people talaga sometimes yung mga nag-aaral sa Christian universities and even former seminarians on our case as we encounter them might after the end of the formation para magdi-debate sa faith. We can see here the importance of philosophy as handmaid of theology because the problem is that not everyone can present the faith as rational as possible. Sometimes the handing down of faith is paano ba parang nagiging by force instead of persuading the people through rational explanation, parang sinasabi lang because the authority said this, because the scripture said this, you must accept it as it is. So I guess that's one thing that the Catholic institution should focus, making the faith more rational as possible. Now, in terms of the practical aspect, I would agree with what you said that Christians nowadays lack models in terms of their faith. That's why in the end of the lecture, in the end of the presentation, I mentioned that there is a radical call for moral formation because it is by being an example, by being exemplar, that we can encourage people to become Christians. But there is a prerequisite to become exemplar. Eh? You need first to rectify your will. Because by nature, if you're going to follow Christian tradition, yung fallen nature ng human person would always incline him to the lower good. And so if you want to be an exemplar, if you want to be an exemplar in the pursuit of the higher good, dapat rectified muna yung will mo para most likely you can pursue what is proper as what Christianity would present or ano yung goal ng Christianity. So, thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Okay po, sir. Thank you po. Nasagot naman po. Siguro we can proceed to one question today na na-post ito from Sir Christian Solis. It's good to know that Catholic universities contribute to the rectification of will, but how can non-Catholic universities be formators of citizens?
Thank you for the question, sir. Of course, non-Catholic universities, particularly yung mga government and non-sectarian, cannot advocate for a certain type of morality na pinapresent ng certain religion kasi dapat non-biased sa any religion. I guess we need to appeal to their conscience because conscience is a general thing. I guess everyone, yung Catholics, Muslim, whatever your religion is, there's the concept of conscience. And yun yung dapat i-utilize ng non-Catholic universities.
Okay, sir. Thank you po. And we also have another question po from Sir Anton. I just want to ask concerning your reply to Andre. In making the faith rational, does it become possible to have an intercultural dialogue? I have the bias of saying no because it is precisely due to the rationalization throughout the history that we have caused inquisition and the like.
Okay. If I get it correctly, parang yung rationalization of faith can it be enculturated? Did I get it right, sir?
No, if I just may refine it, in the sense that because we rationalize the faith, so we try to explain it in ways we can understand. But for
Yes.
example, if we say we only have one God, there should only be one God, that already becomes a hindrance, I would say, to dialogue with people who believe in many gods. For example, like Hinduism or something similar to that. Our own form of rationalization entails making our truths understandable, but it would not be understandable to them. That's what I would want to ask.
Oh, okay,
So
sir.
yeah.
So in the case of intercultural dialogue, I guess you can still use here yung the rationalization of faith, but no longer to assert yung truth ng faith natin, but in order to reach a common ground wherein two different faith can meet in between so that mutual respect can somewhat develop. So siguro dun pumapasok yung rationalization in the sense that we can understand yung other religion.
Okay po, sir. Sir Anton, thank you for the question. We have Dr. Rochi Machenza here. Is rationalizing the term to describe reasonability of the faith? Ayun po.
I won't say that it is the total reasonability of the faith, Sir Machenza, because at the end, faith is always that jump, that limp to the unknown. So at least when we speak of the rationalization of faith, we're trying to make reasonable some facets of faith that are accessible for us at this moment. Because at the end, the truths of the faith continues to unveil pa naman over time. So what is available for us, we make use of it, make it more reasonable so that other people can understand it po. Thank you po.
Yun po. If you have any other questions po, you can just type it here in the chat box po. And of course, na-open na rin po yung evaluation for tonight's conference. It's also in the chat box. You may want to answer the evaluation form. And we also have a question from Sir Einstein. There's a strong suggestion concerning the rectification of the will towards being a real Christian. But the suggestion is couched in a rather prescriptive manner, falling into the trap of looking at the problem as if things are transparent. Does the suggestion of the paper viable for every living person in a different economic strata, given the difference in thought and intelligence?
Okay, sir. So in terms of thought and difference, I guess dito po pumapasok yung the call of Vatican II for Aggiornamento and Resorcimento, that we develop ways on how to make faith accessible to people regardless of their economic and social status. Because at the end, we are presenting yung one common truth that we need to somewhat rectify, that we first need to rectify our will in order to not fully comprehend it, but mas ma-comprehend natin siya little by little. So the rectification is still there, but the ways in how to promote this rectification as well as the presentation of the truth should be delivered in various ways depending on the person who will receive it. I hope, Sir Einstein, I get the question clearly po.
Hindi, kaya ko lang siya natanong, Josh, Sir Joshua, kasi parang it seems that the suggestion comes from parang it's a vertical coming from above to below eh. So parang
Yes, sir.
Ang naisip ko lang is if the suggestion meets the actual condition of the faith, no, parang the faithful, parang so yun siguro yung kaya ko lang siya natanong kasi pag nagutom talaga yung mga tao, hindi talaga sila pwedeng magnilay eh. Di ba? Parang it
Yes,
will be
sir,
very
yes.
difficult for them. So siguro yun lang, kaya ko lang siya natanong. Thank you.
So siguro po, sir, if I may add lang po, if the process of rectification can be done, parang masimulan po ng human person, little by little, magiging malinaw sa kanya what is the good that he should really be pursuing. I guess one part, following yung line of thought ni Bonaventure, talagang mahirap iintindihin or i-decipher ano ba yung truth, especially in our current situation. Dagdag pa po yung effect ng fall. So parang labo-labo na. But if we can rectify the will, that's one step forward in understanding yung what we should really be pursuing po.
Okay, if there are other questions po, ayun, perhaps we could call this our last question rin for tonight. From Sir Base, I would just like to clarify if you mean by rationalization of faith is also equivalent or in a sense related with St. Paul VI's assertion that faith must be proposed and must never be imposed. Is rectifying the will means being receptive as well?
Thank you, Sir Blaise. When we speak of the rationalization of faith, as mentioned by Paul VI, if faith should be proposed, all the more it is important for us to make the faith more rational. Because if the teachings of the faith would remain on the pedestal, parang hindi siya ganun ka-rational, hindi siya ganun ka-logical sa tao, magiging impose yung approach niya. Whereas if you use the platform of dialogue through logical discourse, reasonable discourse, mas magiging proposed yung dating ng faith. Now, when you speak of the rectification of the will, once you accept, at least for me, following Bonaventure, once you accept the Christian faith, side by side with that is you need to rectify your will in order for you to fully appreciate what that faith offers you. Otherwise, you would still remain lang dun sa pagiging nominal baptized Catholic without enjoying yung good na pinapresent talaga ng Christian faith. Say, for example, you can be a baptized Christian, pero iba yung kind of lifestyle mo because yung will mo hindi na-rectify kaya mas inclined ka pa rin sa lower good. Whereas, if the will is rectified, let me be clear with this, it does not mean naman pag na-rectify yung will, hanggang at the end of your life, directed ka na lagi sa sumum bonum. No. The rectification is an endless process. So habang mas lumalalim yung process of rectification, mas nagiging align yung will sa supreme good at mas nagiging align yung intellect sa truth na pinapresent ng Christianity. Thank you, Sir Blaze.
And po, okay, so it is already 8 o'clock, and perhaps we can end our discussion. We can already end our discussion here. And of course, we like to thank Sir Joshua Cedric Gundayao for his presentation today. Ayun pa, virtual warm round of applause na lang po din tayo. Ayun po, Jillian. Jillian, may other few words po tayo before we end po for today's conference.
For the final words, I have sent the link of the evaluation in the chat box, so feel free to fill that out for those who are interested in getting the certificates. For tomorrow, we will start at the same time and end at the same time, and I think that's it for tonight's conference, right? So thank you everyone for attending tonight's conference, and hopefully we'll see you for the next few days.
Thank you po very much. Mabuhay po.